But what if those families were discovering that their advanced degrees and carefully tended cul-de-sac lawns still didn't grant them access to all the country's benefits? That their children still weren't safe, even in the nation's most sought-after public schools? That they were now stuck, not just in some quiet personal crisis, but in a wider unraveling, one that threatened to undermine the civil rights-era dreams of equal opportunity and harmonious integration that followed the deeply flawed vision upon which suburbia was built. America, with its long history of broken promises, might not hold. It was this fear that ultimately drew me back home. On a blustery day in January 2020, I climbed into my station wagon and drove across the Pennsylvania Turnpike. I was 43, tired, with a to-do list already spilling off the page. But I desperately wanted to locate an American dream that wouldn't leave my own 2 children stuck, financially or emotionally or morally. And now the path forward seemed clear. I first had to understand how the abundant opportunities my family extracted from Penn Hills a generation earlier were linked to the cratering fortunes of the families who live there now. My search for answers would eventually lead me on a journey across America's rapidly changing suburbs, from the McMansion-filled subdivision sprouting up north of Dallas to the bungalow-lined blocks of long-blighted south-central Los Angeles. Connecting these far ends of the suburban spectrum, I learned, was a relentless cycle of racialized development and decline that took root after World War II, then sucked huge swaths of the country into a pattern of slash-and-burn development that functioned like a Ponzi scheme. Through massive public subsidies, exclusionary local policies, and a nasty habit of pushing the true costs of new infrastructure off onto future generations, our government had essentially paid millions of white families to run away from Black America, then encouraged us to cycle through a series of disposable communities with shelf lives just long enough to extract a little more opportunity before we moved out, stuck someone else with the bill, and restarted the cycle somewhere new. But even as this pattern became ubiquitous, it remained mostly invisible. One big reason was described by philosopher Charles Mills as a willful racial ignorance that allows white people to protect ourselves from the truths we've needed not to know since the country's founding. Even today, elected officials and everyday Americans alike remain deeply committed to forgetting about the government-sponsored white flight that fueled suburbia's rise, to erasing from memory the burning crosses, racial real estate covenants, and gerrymandered school boundaries that were used to keep everyone else out, to ignoring the scars left by the long-ago compromises of desegregation, and to dismissing the pain of whole neighborhoods that mass suburbanization helped undo. When an aging suburb began to teeter, we turned a blind eye, leaving ourselves unable to reconcile the vacant businesses, declining test scores, and dwindling property values with our vision of what that place was supposed to be. And after the community's tax base vanished, its school system capsized, and its residents were all Black and brown, we promptly forgot that the hollowed-out place left behind had ever been a suburb at all. Much attention has already been paid to how this cycle and its underlying ideology decimated America's cities. In their classic book, American Apartheid, sociologists Douglas Massey and Nancy Denton found that by the late 1970s, roughly 2/3 of the white people in the nation's major metropolises had already fled to suburbia, often on the strength of privileged access to cheap mortgage loans guaranteed by the Federal Housing Administration and Veterans Administration. This exodus led to a profound concentration of poverty in the mostly Black and brown urban areas they left behind. Thanks to rising home values and a dizzying array of tax breaks, white suburbanites then saw our advantages multiply and ripple across generations. By 1989, the typical white family held more than 10 times the wealth of the typical Black family, and white Americans were 4 times as likely as our Black counterparts to inherit money. The advantage that FHA and VA loans gave the white lower middle class in the 1940s and 50s has become permanent, concluded economist Richard Rothstein in his 2017 book, The Color of Law. By then, however, America was already entering a perilous new stage. The same cycle that had already devastated our cities was now churning through suburbia itself. Hundreds of aging inner-ring suburbs like Penn Hills were falling into debt and disrepair. Thousands of newer suburban communities found themselves in the path of the same gathering storm, and 2 major societal shifts were making the problem increasingly difficult to ignore. The first was demographic. The U.S. Census Bureau began projecting that America will be majority non-white before mid-century, the result of a white population that began aging and declining just as the nation experienced an explosion of youthful